I never expected her to open the door, or for my heart to follow. The evening had fallen softly, draping the quiet street in a calm, almost dreamlike stillness. Rain had begun to drizzle, tiny droplets sparkling under the golden glow of the street lamps. He stood just outside her apartment door, gripping a small, thoughtful gift in his hands. His heart beat a little faster with every hesitant breath. This was a risk, a choice between retreating into familiar solitude or stepping forward into the unknown. The package felt heavy in his hands, not from its weight, but from the significance he had unconsciously attached to it. He imagined her opening the door, the look of surprise on her face, the brief pause before she decided whether to welcome him inside or close the door quietly and shut the moment away forever. He knocked once, softly at first, then waited. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. He held his breath, listening to the muted patter of rain and the faint hum of the city beyond the corridor. The door creaked open, and there she was, effortlessly composed, yet there was a spark of something unguarded in her eyes. She looked at him with a mixture of surprise, caution, and warmth, the kind of quiet intensity that made it impossible to look away. Her hair, slightly damp from the rain, clung softly to the curve of her neck, and the faint scent of her perfume carried to him, subtle and grounding. You shouldn't have knocked," she whispered, her voice low, intimate, as if sharing a secret meant only for him. Then, almost immediately, a gentle, playful warmth softened her tone. "But I'm glad you did." It was a moment suspended in time. The slight tilt of her head, the soft parting of her lips, the way her hand lingered on the doorframe. All of it conveyed more than words ever could. He felt the quiet swell of anticipation, a mix of relief and awe that she had invited him into this fragile, unexpected space between them. He shifted slightly, his fingers brushing nervously against the edge of the gift. She noticed, and her eyes softened further, an unspoken acknowledgement of the effort, the courage it had taken for him to stand here in the rain. The air between them was charged with possibilities, an invisible thread of curiosity and mutual intrigue connecting their gazes. Finally, she stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. The hallway light spilled over them, wrapping them in a warm, intimate glow. Each step forward felt both monumental and delicate, as if stepping into a story that neither had fully written yet. In that moment, the world beyond the apartment, its noise, its rules, its expectations, faded into irrelevance. All that existed was the gentle rain outside, the quiet creak of the floor beneath his feet, and the subtle, electric awareness of her presence so close to him. It was the beginning of something slow, profound, and achingly human, a connection that could only grow if nurtured with patience, respect, and care. And just like that, with one knock, one whispered admission, and one shared glance, the first spark of their story had ignited. As he stepped into her apartment, a wave of warmth enveloped him, both literal, from the cozy heating, and metaphorical, from the quiet welcome she offered. The space smelled faintly of coffee, polished wood, and the subtle hint of her perfume lingering in the air. Every corner of the room spoke of her personality. Soft lighting, carefully arranged books, and delicate personal touches that made the apartment feel lived in yet intimate. She gestured toward the living area with a graceful sweep of her hand, a small, amused smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Come in," she said, her voice light but deliberate, carrying the echo of her earlier whispered words. He stepped closer, the nervous weight in his chest beginning to mix with an unfamiliar warmth. Every movement seemed amplified, the soft creak of the floor under his shoes, the way her eyes followed him as he adjusted to the space, and the quiet hum of the city outside the window creating a serene backdrop. Their initial conversation was cautious, tentative, but each word carried a subtle weight. He noticed the rhythm of her speech, the way she paused briefly before answering questions, as if considering not just the words but the emotional impact they might carry. She laughed softly at one of his awkward jokes, and the sound was like a spark, lighting an unexpected warmth in the pit of his chest. It was the kind of laugh that invited him closer without him needing to realize it. As they moved through the room, he felt the brush of her fingertips as she passed him a mug of coffee. Their contact brief, but electric in its subtlety. He realized that these small, unplanned touches, brushing against an arm, sharing the same narrow space, were charged with a quiet intensity. Each glance, exchanged, carried more than casual curiosity. It was a gentle study of the other, a tentative exploration of boundaries and emotions. He took note of her movements, the graceful way she crossed the room, the slight sway of her hair as she turned, the way her gaze flicked toward him and lingered longer than necessary. And she, in turn, seemed to notice the careful attentiveness in his posture, the way he leaned slightly forward when she spoke, how his hands subconsciously mirrored her gestures, a silent attempt at connection. For a moment, silence settled between them, heavy yet comforting. He could feel her presence close to him, the subtle warmth radiating as she leaned slightly, adjusting the scarf draped over her shoulders. He realized that the conversation was no longer just about words. It was about the space they were sharing, the gentle awareness of proximity, and the fragile, electric tension that lingered in the quiet. By the end of the evening, the awkwardness had softened into something richer, a shared rhythm of laughter, glances, and small touches that felt deliberate and unspoken at once. The age gap between them, hinted at in their experiences and perspectives, added an undercurrent of depth to their connection rather than distance. He left that night with a lingering awareness of her presence in his thoughts, a quiet anticipation for the next moment they would share in this slow, unfolding story. Rain had softened into a gentle drizzle, its rhythmic tapping against the window pane creating a quiet, intimate backdrop. They sat across from each other on the worn but inviting couch, a small coffee table between them holding steaming mugs that radiated warmth into their hands. The city outside felt distant, muted by the glass and the cocoon of her apartment. Within this small, glowing space, the world seemed to shrink until it encompassed only the two of them. Their conversation had grown more personal. Words that might have seemed ordinary elsewhere carried weight here, shaded by the closeness of their bodies and the subtle vulnerability in their eyes. He spoke carefully, hesitating at moments, aware that his openness was a gesture of trust, not mere talk. She listened with quiet attentiveness, her gaze steady yet soft, conveying more than words ever could. The warmth in her eyes reassured him. Here, he could let the barriers drop, even if only a fraction. She shared small fragments of her life, pieces of her past that revealed the layers beneath her confident exterior. A laugh escaped her, tinged with nostalgia, as she recounted moments of both triumph and quiet regret. The honesty in her voice drew him in, compelling him to match it with his own truths. He spoke of mistakes he had made, lessons he had learned, and moments of doubt that had shaped him. Each revelation, no matter how minor, became a bridge between them, a thread weaving trust through the silence and shared laughter alike. The age gap between them was palpable, but not in a way that separated them. Instead, it became a subtle rhythm of guidance and curiosity. She spoke with a calm assurance shaped by experience, while he responded with sincerity and fresh perspective. Each learned from the other, their differences smoothing into a delicate balance of admiration and respect. Their body language mirrored the emotional intimacy unfolding. She adjusted the cushion beneath her, leaning slightly forward, and he found himself leaning in, drawn by the subtle gravity of the moment. Fingers brushed inadvertently on the table, hands grazing as they reached for their mugs. Each contact was electric yet innocent, a quiet acknowledgement of the space they were sharing. Their eyes met repeatedly, each glance lingering just a little longer than before, speaking volumes in silence. At one point, she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and he noticed the gentle curve of her cheek in the soft lamplight. She caught him staring, and instead of looking away, she offered a small, knowing smile. It was a fleeting connection, intimate in its simplicity, and it left both of them feeling exposed, yet safe, vulnerable yet comforted. As the night deepened, the conversation eased into comfortable pauses. They didn't need constant words. Their shared presence, the warmth of their hands, and the quiet, unspoken attentiveness spoke louder than anything said aloud. For the first time, both felt a subtle shift, the beginnings of trust, the slow unfolding of something deeper, something profoundly human, and quietly, perhaps, the first stirrings of desire. In this space, cocooned from the world, they discovered that vulnerability was not weakness. It was the bridge to connection, to understanding, and to the slow, unfolding intimacy that would define the story yet to come. The night had deepened, drawing shadows across the apartment in soft, elongated patterns. The rain had ceased, leaving the city outside, washed in reflections of streetlights and passing cars. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted subtly, quiet, charged, and almost imperceptibly intimate. The earlier warmth of laughter and shared stories had softened into a silence thick with unspoken thoughts and subtle awareness. They found themselves sitting closer now, knees nearly touching as they navigated the confines of the couch. The distance between them was measured in small, tentative movements, leaning slightly toward each other, brushing past one another as they reached for the same blanket, sharing the delicate heat of proximity without speaking of it. Every motion carried weight, every glance a question, every pause an invitation. He noticed the way her hand rested casually on the armrest, fingers slightly curling as if unconsciously reaching for contact. When his own hand brushed against the edge of hers, it was quick and almost accidental, but it left a lingering warmth that traveled up his arm. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed the fleeting connection, her gaze meeting his with a quiet intensity that spoke of curiosity, intrigue, and restrained desire. Conversation continued in low tones, but words were secondary to the subtle dance of body language. She leaned toward him slightly as she spoke, her shoulder brushing against his ever so gently, a soft, electric friction that neither mentioned but both felt. He found himself drawn to the rhythm of her gestures, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes sparkled in the dim light, the subtle shift of weight that brought her closer without intention. Each movement became a silent dialogue, a conversation of longing and hesitation, of closeness tested and explored. The age difference between them added layers to the tension rather than creating distance. Her composure, shaped by life experience, contrasted beautifully with his eager attentiveness, creating a push and pull of unspoken questions and restrained emotion. He admired her in a way that went beyond physical attraction. He was captivated by the depth of her presence, the quiet wisdom behind her words, and the vulnerability glimpsed only in fleeting moments of laughter or introspection. At one point, she shifted, reaching for her mug, and their hands brushed again. This time, he held his position slightly longer, allowing the touch to linger. She glanced at him, a half-smile playing on her lips, eyes reflecting an acknowledgement of the growing tension. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet charged with possibility, a magnetic pull neither could ignore. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. The space between them had become a living thing, filled with anticipation, curiosity, and the quiet thrill of unspoken desire. He felt his heartbeat echo in the stillness, matching the rhythm of her quiet breaths. Every look, every brush of skin, every shared pause carried a weight neither dared name aloud, but both understood instinctively. By the end of the night, the tension had solidified into a delicate, fragile intimacy. It was unspoken, unclaimed, yet undeniable, a promise of connection that could only grow with patience, trust, and the slow unfolding of emotions. In this quiet, charged space, they both sensed the first real stirrings of desire, tempered by respect, hesitation, and a profound understanding of the human heart. The apartment was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights streaming through the window. Outside, the hum of distant traffic was faint, almost melodic, while the gentle flicker of lamplight created pools of warmth across the room. He found himself standing a little closer to her than before, a nervous weight pressing on his chest, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the stillness. She was by the window, her profile softened by the glow of the night. Her gaze drifted over the city, thoughtful and composed, yet he sensed an undercurrent of emotion beneath her calm exterior. He watched her for a moment, gathering courage, feeling the words press against the back of his throat. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about honesty, about taking the delicate risk of exposing his feelings. I need to tell you something, he began, his voice low, careful, almost trembling. He paused, the pause heavy with anticipation, as if the silence itself might hold the answer before the words even left his lips. I know this is sudden and maybe unexpected, but I can't stop thinking about you, about this connection we've begun. It's more than I anticipated, and I want you to know I care. She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise and measured curiosity. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The apartment seemed to shrink around them. The distance between them weighted with unspoken possibilities. He felt the vulnerability in the moment, the rawness of honesty that could either bring them closer or push them apart. Then, as if granting permission, she allowed herself a small, gentle smile. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried an unmistakable warmth, a quiet acknowledgement of his courage. I can hear that, she said softly, her voice a soothing balm to his anxious thoughts. And I'm glad you told me. Encouraged by her words, he stepped a fraction closer, the air between them thick with quiet tension and unspoken longing. He extended a hand, hesitating just long enough for the moment to stretch deliciously before gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The touch was tender, electric in its simplicity, a gesture heavy with meaning but perfectly innocent. She didn't pull back. Instead, her hand twitched slightly, then rested lightly on his arm. It was a subtle, grounding touch, a quiet affirmation that she was present, that she was willing to meet him halfway in this delicate dance of emotion. The room seemed to hold its breath, the ordinary world outside fading completely as the two of them navigated this intimate, uncharted space. Their eyes met, and in that gaze, they exchanged a silent understanding. Hesitation mingled with desire, respect blended with curiosity, and the warmth of genuine human connection filled the room. It was the moment when restraint met courage, the instant when honesty opened the door to closeness, and both felt the first true tremor of trust and emotional intimacy. In that shared, unspoken acknowledgement, the foundation of something profound was laid. This was no fleeting attraction. It was the quiet beginning of a bond that demanded patience, care, and the courage to remain vulnerable. And in that glow of possibility, they both sensed the promise of a story slowly, beautifully unfolding. The night had settled into a calm rhythm, the city outside muted by the gentle hum of distant traffic and the occasional flicker of neon through the window. Inside, the apartment glowed softly, casting a warm, inviting light over the space where they sat together. There was a quiet comfort between them now, a delicate ease that had taken time to grow, nurtured by shared laughter, vulnerable moments, and unspoken understanding. They leaned back on the couch, shoulders almost touching, but close enough that the warmth between them was palpable. She sipped her tea, her fingers brushing against the rim of the cup, and he watched, mesmerized by the effortless grace of her movements. Every subtle gesture, the tilt of her head, the soft curve of her smile, the brief flicker of thought in her eyes, seemed magnified in this intimate cocoon. Conversation had grown softer, more relaxed. They shared light jokes, small anecdotes from their past, and playful commentary on the mundane things of life. But beneath the levity, there was a steady undercurrent of connection, an emotional tether that pulled them together without force or urgency. He found himself stealing glances at her, noticing the gentle rise of her shoulders as she laughed, the way her eyes lingered on his face, almost as if studying him with quiet curiosity and appreciation. At one point, she shifted slightly, leaning closer, and he felt the subtle warmth of her presence brush against him. He responded instinctively, letting his arm rest lightly behind her on the back of the couch, not to crowd her, but to offer silent reassurance and comfort. She didn't flinch. Instead, she allowed herself to sink a little closer, a natural, unspoken acceptance of the space they shared. Their hands found each other's almost without conscious thought. Fingers intertwined briefly, then parted, then returned, an ebb and flow of touch that was both electric and grounding. Each contact carried the weight of unspoken understanding, a message that neither words nor actions alone could convey. It was a delicate affirmation. They were here, fully present, and willing to explore the closeness without rushing, without fear. The warmth between them extended beyond touch. There was a subtle, emotional intimacy in shared silences, the way they could sit together comfortably without the need for constant words, the way laughter bubbled naturally, the quiet rhythm of synchronized breathing. He felt the gentle steadiness of her heartbeat when she leaned against him briefly, and it mirrored the rhythm of his own emotions, tender, cautious, yet open. By the end of the night, the intimacy between them had deepened into something undeniable. It was a connection built on trust, patience, and genuine affection. They didn't need dramatic declarations or grand gestures. The simplicity of presence, the warmth of a shared glance, the comfort of a hand resting lightly against another was enough. In that small, quiet world of their own making, they discovered that true intimacy was not about urgency. It was about patience, mutual care, and the subtle, profound ways two hearts could touch. And as the night drew toward its close, both felt a quiet satisfaction. This closeness, this tenderness, was real, and it had the promise of growing into something enduring and beautiful. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains, spilling golden warmth across the room. The rain from the night before had left a fresh, clean scent lingering in the air, blending with the faint aroma of coffee and the comforting familiarity of her apartment. Outside, the city was waking slowly, but inside, time felt suspended, holding its breath as if acknowledging the quiet, tender moment they shared. They sat close on the couch, shoulders brushing, fingers entwined without conscious thought. The night's tension had dissolved into something softer, richer, a quiet, steady intimacy that carried with it both contentment and anticipation. The hesitation of previous encounters had melted away, replaced by mutual understanding and a gentle certainty of shared connection. She leaned her head lightly against his chest, and he felt the subtle rhythm of her heartbeat beneath his palm. The warmth of her presence seeped into him, grounding his thoughts, easing his anxieties, and reminding him that this was real. It wasn't just attraction or infatuation. It was trust, curiosity, and a profound sense of being understood. Each subtle gesture, the tilt of her head, the quiet rise and fall of her breath, the soft squeeze of her fingers, spoke volumes about the bond they had nurtured together. They exchanged soft smiles, those small, intimate expressions that carried more weight than any grand declaration. Her eyes met his, lingering in quiet acknowledgment of everything they had shared. The laughter, the vulnerability, the tender tension that had blossomed into this warm, steady closeness. Words were unnecessary. The connection had grown beyond them, a language built entirely on presence, touch, and trust. At one point, she lifted her gaze, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. He reached instinctively, tucking it gently behind her ear. Their eyes met again, and a small, knowing smile passed between them. It was an unspoken promise, a silent agreement that whatever the future held, they would face it together, grounded in this newfound intimacy and understanding. The apartment, once a backdrop for uncertainty and tentative moments, had become a sanctuary, a place where they could exist authentically without pretense or fear. Every detail of their environment, The soft lighting, the faint scent of coffee, the morning glow on the walls, mirrored the warmth they felt within. Even the mundane objects in the room seemed touched by the significance of the moment, ordinary yet infused with extraordinary meaning. As they lingered in each other's presence, a quiet, unhurried laughter emerged, a reflection of comfort and shared joy. He brushed his thumb over the back of her hand, and she responded with a gentle squeeze. These small, deliberate touches conveyed what words could not: reassurance, affection, and the simple delight of being together. By the time the morning fully settled, the story of their evening had reached a gentle, satisfying conclusion. The hesitation, the longing, and the quiet tension had all transformed into warmth, understanding, and an unspoken promise of continuity. In that space, filled with light, touch, and the quiet resonance of two hearts attuned to each other, they discovered the profound beauty of a connection nurtured patiently, honestly, and tenderly. And as they sat there, together yet comfortably silent, both knew this was only the beginning. Their story had unfolded with care, respect, and subtle intensity, leaving behind the perfect blend of warmth, hope, and emotional fulfillment.